And you, Jennifer said softly, would always find a reason to clean that hallway during those times. The memory came flooding back to Frank with startling clarity. Jenny Walsh, 7 years old, sitting against the wall with her arms crossed and her face set in defiant anger. And Frank, who had learned over the years that sometimes children needed someone to simply acknowledge their existence without judgment. You never said much, Jennifer continued. Maybe good morning, Jenny, or having a tough day? But you said it like you actually cared about the answer. Like I was a person worth caring about. Frank remembered now how he'd made sure to empty the trash near where she sat. How he'd sometimes quietly while he worked, not for her specifically, but creating a sense of calm presence in what was always a stressful situation for a child in trouble. One day, Jennifer said, I was having a particularly bad morning. I got into another fight, and I was sitting in that hallway crying. Not the angry crying I usually did, but really crying. Scared crying. Because I'd heard my teacher telling another teacher that maybe I needed to be in a special school for problem children. Frank's heart clenched. He remembered that conversation, remembered how it had bothered him. You walked by with your mop bucket, and you stopped. You didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment. Then you said, You know, Jenny, I've been working in schools for a long time, and I've learned something important. Sometimes the kids who cause the most trouble are the ones who care the most about things. They just haven't figured out how to show it yet. Frank was amazed that she remembered his exact words from 3 decades ago. Then you said, I think you care a lot about things, don't you, Jenny? I think that's why you get so upset when things don't seem fair. Jennifer wiped her eyes, but she was smiling. It was the first time any adult had suggested that my anger might come from caring too much rather than not caring at all. It was the first time anyone had suggested that there might be something good underneath all my bad behavior. Frank sat quietly, moved by her memory, but still not understanding why she was here. That conversation changed everything for me, Mr. Morrison. Not immediately. I was still a troubled kid for a while longer, but it planted a seed. The idea that maybe I wasn't just a problem to be solved, but a person with feelings that made sense. I'm glad that helped, Frank said softly. But Jenny, you were always a good kid underneath all that anger. You just needed someone to see it. And you did see it over the next few years. Whenever I was having a hard day, you'd find a way to remind me that I mattered. Sometimes it was just a nod in the hallway. Sometimes you'd mention that you'd noticed I was helping another student or that my artwork was hanging in the hall. Small things, but they added up. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a small, faded piece of paper. When I was in 5th grade, I wrote you a thank you note. Do you remember? Frank took the paper and unfolded it carefully. In a child's careful handwriting, it read, Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for being nice to me even when I was bad. You make me feel like I'm not invisible. When I grow up, I want to help kids like you helped me. Your friend, Jenny Walsh. Frank stared at the note, his vision blurring. You kept this for 32 years? I kept it because it was a promise. A promise I made to myself that someday I'd find a way to help children the way you helped me. And did you? Jennifer's smile lit up her entire face. Mr. Morrison, I became a school counselor. I've worked in elementary schools for the past 28 years, specializing in helping problem children. Kids who are angry, scared, acting out, feeling invisible. Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. I've helped hundreds of children over the years, Mr. Morrison. Hundreds. And every single time I sit with a troubled child and help them understand that their feelings make sense, that they matter, that there's something good inside them worth nurturing, I think of you. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a thick folder. I brought something else for your birthday. Letters. Dozens of them. From children I've worked with over the years who've gone on to become teachers, social workers, doctors, parents who break cycles of dysfunction because someone helped them see their worth when they were young. Frank opened the folder with trembling hands. Letter after letter from young adults thanking Jennifer for seeing them, for believing in them, for helping them find their way. Every one of these children, Jennifer said quietly, was helped because you helped me first. You started a chain reaction of kindness that has touched hundreds of lives over 3 decades. Frank looked up at her, overwhelmed. Jenny, I had no idea. How could you? You were just doing what came naturally to you, seeing children as human beings worthy of respect and attention. But Mr. Morrison, that simple act of seeing me, of treating me like I mattered, changed the entire trajectory of my life. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gray November day. I've kept track of you over the years. I know your children live far away and don't visit often. I know you've been alone since your wife died. I know that you probably feel like your life didn't matter much, like you were just someone who cleaned floors and fixed things. She turned back to face him. But I'm here to tell you that you were never invisible, Mr. Morrison. You were the most important person in my life when I needed it most, and through me, you've been important in hundreds of other lives. Frank sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. There's more, Jennifer said gently. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of reaching out to some other people whose lives you've touched over the years. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. And you, Jennifer said softly, would always find a reason to clean that hallway during those times. The memory came flooding back to Frank with startling clarity. Jenny Walsh, 7 years old, sitting against the wall with her arms crossed and her face set in defiant anger. And Frank, who had learned over the years that sometimes children needed someone to simply acknowledge their existence without judgment. You never said much, Jennifer continued. Maybe good morning, Jenny, or having a tough day? But you said it like you actually care about the answer, like I was a person worth caring about. Frank remembered now how he'd made sure to empty the trash near where she sat, how he'd sometimes come quietly while he worked, not for her specifically, but creating a sense of calm presence in what was always a stressful situation for a child in trouble. One day, Jennifer said, I was having a particularly bad morning. I got into another fight, and I was sitting in that hallway crying. Not the angry crying I usually did, but really crying. Scared crying. Because I'd heard my teacher telling another teacher that maybe I needed to be in a special school for problem children. Frank's heart clenched. He remembered that conversation, remembered how it had bothered him. You walked by with your mop bucket, and you stopped. You didn't say anything at first, just stood there for a moment. Then you said, You know, Jenny, I've been working in schools for a long time, and I've learned something important. Sometimes the kids who cause the most trouble are the ones who care the most about things. They just haven't figured out how to show it yet. Frank was amazed that she remembered his exact words from 3 decades ago. Then you said, I think you care a lot about things, don't you, Jenny? I think that's why you get so upset when things don't seem fair. Jennifer wiped her eyes, but she was smiling. It was the first time any adult had suggested that my anger might come from caring too much rather than not caring at all. It was the first time anyone had suggested that there might be something good underneath all my bad behavior. Frank sat quietly, moved by her memory, but still not understanding why she was here. That conversation changed everything for me, Mr. Morrison. Not immediately. I was still a troubled kid for a while longer, but it planted a seed. The idea that maybe I wasn't just a problem to be solved, but a person with feelings that made sense. I'm glad that helped, Frank said softly. But Jenny, you were always a good kid underneath all that anger. You just needed someone to see it. And you did see it. Over the next few years, whenever I was having a hard day, you'd find a way to remind me that I mattered. Sometimes it was just a nod in the hallway. Sometimes you'd mention that you'd noticed I was helping another student or that my artwork was hanging in the hall. Small things, but they added up. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a small, faded piece of paper. When I was in 5th grade, I wrote you a thank you note. Do you remember? Frank took the paper and unfolded it carefully. In a child's careful handwriting, it read, Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for being nice to me even when I was bad. You make me feel like I'm not invisible. When I grow up, I want to help kids like you helped me. Your friend, Jenny Walsh. Frank stared at the note, his vision blurring. You kept this for 32 years? I kept it because it was a promise. A promise I made to myself that someday I'd find a way to help children the way you helped me. And did you? Jennifer's smile lit up her entire face. Mr. Morrison, I became a school counselor. I've worked in elementary schools for the past 28 years, specializing in helping problem children. Kids who are angry, scared, acting out, feeling invisible. Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. I've helped hundreds of children over the years, Mr. Morrison. Hundreds. And every single time I sit with a troubled child and help them understand that their feelings make sense, that they matter, that there's something good inside them worth nurturing, I think of you. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a thick folder. I brought something else for your birthday. Letters. Dozens of them. From children I've worked with over the years who've gone on to become teachers, social workers, doctors, parents who break cycles of dysfunction because someone helped them see their worth when they were young. Frank opened the folder with trembling hands. Letter after letter from young adults thanking Jennifer for seeing them, for believing in them, for helping them find their way. Every one of these children, Jennifer said quietly, was helped because you helped me first. You started a chain reaction of kindness that has touched hundreds of lives over 3 decades. Frank looked up at her, overwhelmed. Jenny, I had no idea. How could you? You were just doing what came naturally to you, seeing children as human beings worthy of respect and attention. But Mr. Morrison, that simple act of seeing me, of treating me like I mattered, changed the entire trajectory of my life. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gray November day. I've kept track of you over the years. I know your children live far away and don't visit often. I know you've been alone since your wife died. I know that you probably feel like your life didn't matter much, like you were just someone who cleaned floors and fixed things. She turned back to face him. But I'm here to tell you that you were never invisible, Mr. Morrison. You were the most important person in my life when I needed it most, and through me, you've been important in hundreds of other lives. Frank sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. There's more, Jennifer said gently. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of reaching out to some other people whose lives you've touched over the years. As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. Frank looked at Jennifer with confusion and growing amazement as the doorbell chimed again. More people? Mr. Morrison, you spent 42 years being quietly important in people's lives. Today, some of those people wanted to return the favor. Frank opened the door to find a man in his 40s wearing a police uniform, holding a small wrapped gift. Behind him stood a woman about the same age in a nurse's uniform, and behind her, a young man in his 20s wearing a mechanic's coveralls. Mr. Morrison, the police officer said with a warm smile. My name is Detective Mike Chun. I don't know if you remember me, but 35 years ago, I was Michael Chun, a scared 10-year-old kid whose parents had just emigrated from Taiwan. Frank studied the man's face, and slowly, recognition dawned. Michael? Little Michael who barely spoke English? That's me. Mike's smile widened. The kid who spent his first year at Millbrook Elementary hiding in bathroom stalls during lunch because he was too embarrassed about his broken English to eat with the other children. The memory came flooding back. Frank remembered finding the boy day after day, sitting alone in the bathroom, too proud to admit he was scared and too frightened to ask for help. You used to bring me sandwiches, Mike said quietly. You pretend you had extras from your lunch, but I figured out years later that you were going without lunch, so I'd have something to eat. You were so thin, Frank said, emotion thick in his voice. And your parents were working such long hours trying to establish their restaurant. You never made me feel ashamed for hiding. You just sit with me for a few minutes, eating your apple or whatever, making it seem normal, like it was perfectly reasonable for a janitor and a scared kid to share lunch in a bathroom. The woman in the nurse's uniform stepped forward. I'm Sarah Martinez, Mr. Morrison. I was Sarah Kowalski back then, in Mrs. Henderson's 3rd grade class. The chubby girl with thick glasses who got picked on constantly. Frank remembered Sarah, a sweet, intelligent child who had been mercilessly teased by her classmates for her appearance. I used to hide in the supply closet during recess, Sarah continued, because the playground was where the worst bullying happened. You'd always find me there, crying over some cruel thing someone had said. You were reading. Frank remembered suddenly, always reading. You'd have a book with you even when you were upset. Because you told me that books were magic, Sarah said, tears in her eyes. You said that people who loved books were special, that reading would take me places those other kids could never imagine going. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Frank. I'm the head of pediatric nursing at Cleveland Children's Hospital now. I specialize in working with children who are struggling with illness, helping them find hope and strength when everything seems dark. The young man in coveralls stepped forward shyly. Mr. Morrison, I'm Danny Rodriguez. I was in school about 15 years ago. I was the kid whose dad left when I was 8, whose mom was always drunk, who came to school dirty and hungry most days. Frank's heart clenched. He remembered Danny, a bright boy trapped in impossible circumstances, old beyond his years. I was so angry back then, Danny continued, ready to fight anyone who looked at me wrong, ready to give up on everything. But you, he paused, struggling with emotion, you taught me that fixing things was important work, that making broken things whole again mattered. You used to help me during lunch breaks, Frank remembered. I'd show you how to repair desks and fix broken equipment. You told me I had good hands for fixing things, that being able to make things work again was a gift. Danny smiled. I own my own auto repair shop now, Mr. Morrison, Rodriguez Motors. I specialize in fixing cars for people who can't afford to go anywhere else. Single moms, elderly folks on fixed incomes, kids just starting out. He handed Frank a small wooden plaque. I made this for you in my shop. It says, "The man who taught me that fixing things fixes hearts too." Frank looked around at these 3 successful adults who had once been struggling children, overwhelmed by the realization that his small act of kindness had rippled out in ways he'd never imagined. Jennifer gestured for everyone to come into the living room. There are more people coming, Mr. Morrison, but I wanted these 3 to start because they represent something important, the different ways you help children who were struggling. As they settled into the living room, Mike Chin pulled out his phone. Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind, but I brought something to show you. He scrolled through photos until he found what he was looking for. This is my daughter, Lisa. She's 8 now, the same age I was when you helped me. The photo showed a confident, smiling little girl in a karate uniform, holding a trophy. Lisa's nothing like I was. She's outgoing, confident, unafraid of the world. But when she has problems or feels scared, I tell her about you, about the janitor who taught me that kindness doesn't depend on sharing a language, that care about someone means showing up for them even in small ways. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Same here. I have twin boys, and when they struggle with bullying or feeling different, I tell them about Mr. Morrison, the man who taught me that being different wasn't something to hide from, but something to celebrate. My son Alex is starting kindergarten next year, Danny added, and I've already told him to look for the custodian at his school, because custodians are often the wisest people in the building. They see everything. They care about everyone, and they know that the smallest acts of maintenance, whether it's fixing a broken desk or fixing a broken heart, make the whole place work better. Frank sat quietly, absorbing the magnitude of what he was hearing. These weren't just success stories. These were generational impacts. His kindness to frightened children had grown into wisdom these adults were now passing on to their own children. The doorbell rang again, and Jennifer stood up. I'll get it. Mr. Morrison, I hope you're ready for this, because word has gotten out about today, and a lot of people wanted to be here. She opened the door to reveal not 1 or 2 people, but a small crowd. Frank could see at least a dozen people standing on his porch and spilling onto his front lawn. People of different ages, races, backgrounds, all holding small gifts or flowers. Mr. Morrison, Jennifer called from the doorway, I'd like you to meet some more of your kids. One by one, they filed into his house, filling his living room, kitchen, and hallway. Each person introduced themselves with their current name and profession, then reminded Frank who they had been as children. The shy girl who became a teacher, the angry boy who became a social worker, the scared teenager who became a nurse, the lonely child who became a minister. Frank listened in amazement as person after person shared memories of small kindnesses he'd shown them, a word of encouragement during a difficult time, a patient ear when they needed someone to listen, a gentle reminder that they mattered when the rest of the world seemed to suggest otherwise. Mrs. Patterson from across the street appeared at his door, using her walker but moving with determination. Frank Morrison, you old fool, she said affectionately. Did you really think no one noticed what you've been doing all these years? Mrs. Patterson, how did you? Jennifer called me last week, asked if I knew anything about the wonderful man who lived across the street from me. I told her I knew plenty. Mrs. Patterson settled into Frank's recliner like she owned it. I told her about how you've been quietly mowing my lawn every week for the past 5 years, pretending it was because you had your mower out anyway. I told her about how you shovel my sidewalk every winter and fix my storm windows every fall. She looked around the room at all the faces. I told her that Frank Morrison has been taking care of people his whole life, and that it was about time someone took care of him back. As the afternoon wore on, Frank's small house buzzed with conversation, laughter, and stories. People shared food they brought. Children played in his backyard. And for the first time in years, Frank's home felt truly alive. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. At around 4 p.m., a car pulled up outside, and Frank heard commotion on his porch. Jennifer opened the door with the biggest smile he'd seen from her yet. Mr. Morrison, I have one more birthday surprise for you. Through the doorway walked Karen and Tom, his 2 children, both looking slightly stunned and very emotional. Dad, Karen said, her voice breaking, we need to talk. Frank stared at his children in shock, his living room full of people suddenly feeling too small and too big at the same time. Karen looked exactly like her mother had at 52, the same determined jawline, the same way of standing with her shoulders straight even when she was nervous. Tom had gained weight and lost hair, but his eyes still held the mischievous spark that had gotten him in trouble throughout his childhood. Karen? Tom? What are you doing here? Jennifer stepped forward, looking slightly anxious. Mr. Morrison, I hope you're not angry, but I contacted your children yesterday. I felt they should know about today. You called them? Frank looked between Jennifer and his children, unsure whether to feel grateful or mortified. Karen stepped closer, her eyes taking the room full of people. All the faces of adults who had once been the children her father had quietly helped over for decades of service. Dad, she said softly, when Jennifer called me yesterday and told me what she was planning, I thought she was exaggerating. I thought maybe you'd helped a few kids over the years, and she was making it sound bigger than it was. Tom nodded, his voice thick with emotion. We drove here from Chicago together. Took the first flight we could get. We figured we'd humor this woman's story about our father, and then maybe take you out for a quiet birthday dinner. But when we got here an hour ago, Karen continued, and saw all these cars, all these people, Dad, we had no idea. Frank looked around at the faces filling his home. Mike Chin was showing photos of his family to Mrs. Patterson. Sarah Martinez was deep in conversation with 3 other former students who had become healthcare workers. Danny Rodriguez was helping some of the older visitors find comfortable seats. We spent the past hour talking to these people, Tom said, his voice full of wonder. Dad, do you have any idea what they're saying about you? Tom, They're calling you a hero, Karen interrupted, tears streaming down her face. Person after person telling us stories about how you saved them, how you changed their lives, how you taught them what kindness looked like. Mike Chin approached them, having overheard the conversation. You must be Mr. Morrison's children. I've been hoping to meet you. This is Detective Mike Chun, Frank said quietly. He was Michael when he was 10. Mike shook hands with both Karen and Tom. I want you to know that your father probably saved my life. When I was a scared kid who couldn't speak English, hiding in bathroom stalls because I was too ashamed to eat lunch with other children, your father made sure I wasn't alone. He taught me that America could be a place where strangers cared about you. I had no idea, Karen whispered. How could you? Mike smiled. Your father never talked about these things, did he? He just did them. Sarah Martinez joined conversation, having overheard. Your father taught me that being different was something to celebrate, not hide from. When I was being bullied for being overweight and wearing thick glasses, he made me feel like the smartest, most important person in the world. He told me I had good hands for fixing things, Danny Rodriguez added, approaching the group. When I was angry at the world and ready to give up on everything, he showed me that making broken things whole again was sacred work. Frank watched his children's faces as they listened to story after story. Karen, the successful tech entrepreneur who had always been driven and focused, looked stunned by the depth of impact their father had had on so many lives. Tom, the wheeler-dealer real estate developer who measured everything in terms of profit and loss, seemed to be struggling to process the idea that quiet service could generate such profound returns. "Dad," Karen said finally, "why didn't you ever tell us about any of this?" Frank looked around the room, then back at his children. Because it wasn't about recognition, sweetheart. It was just what you do. When you see a child who's struggling, you help them. When you see someone who feels invisible, you make sure they know they're seen. "But, Dad," Tom said, "this isn't just helping a few kids. This is dozens of people whose entire lives were changed because of you." Jennifer approached the group, carrying a folder of letters she'd shown Frank earlier. "Karen, Tom, I know this might be overwhelming, but I brought something I think you should see." She handed them the folder. "These are letters from some of the children I've worked with over the years. Children I was able to help because your father first helped me learn how to see struggling kids with compassion rather than judgment." Karen opened the folder and began reading, her expression growing more amazed with each letter. Tom read over her shoulder, both of them silent as they absorbed the magnitude of their father's indirect impact. "Jennifer," Karen said finally, "how many children are we talking about? How many people have been affected by what our father started? Conservatively, including the direct impact on students at Millbrook Elementary over 42 years, plus the ripple effects through my work and the work of others he influenced, I'd estimate somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people have had their lives positively changed because of your father's kindness." Tom stared at Jennifer in disbelief. 1,000 people? At least. And that's not counting their children, their spouses, their friends. All the people who benefit when someone who was helped as a child grows up to be a helping adult. Frank felt overwhelmed by the numbers, by the scope of what Jennifer was describing. "I think you might be exaggerating." Mr. Morrison interrupted a voice from across the room. An elderly woman Frank didn't recognize was making her way toward them with the help of a cane. "I'm Dorothy Henderson. I taught third grade at Millbrook Elementary for 38 years. "Mrs. Henderson." Frank recognized her now. She retired the same year he had, but looked much older now at 85. "Frank Morrison, in all my years of teaching, I never met anyone who understood children better than you did. You saw things the rest of us missed. You noticed which kids were struggling at home, which ones needed extra attention, which ones just needed someone to believe in them." She turned to Karen and Tom. "Your father didn't just clean the school. He was the heart of that school. Teachers came and went. Principals changed, curriculum shifted, but your father was a constant. The person who remembered every child's name, who knew which kids needed extra lunch money, who could calm down the angriest, most frightened child just by treating them with respect. But he never told us any of this," Karen said, still struggling to process everything. "Because," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "good people don't do good things for recognition. They do them because that's who they are." As the evening wore on, Frank found himself in conversation after conversation with people whose lives he'd touched, often in ways he'd completely forgotten. The shy girl who became confident because he complimented her artwork. The boy with learning disabilities who learned to read because Frank had patiently helped him sound out words during lunch breaks. The teenager whose parents were divorcing, who found stability in Frank's consistent, quiet presence. But it was a conversation with his own children that affected him most deeply. Later in the evening, as the crowd began to thin and people started saying their goodbyes, Karen and Tom approached their father with expressions he'd never seen before, a mixture of admiration, regret, and something that looked like awe. "Dad," Karen said, sitting down beside him on the couch, "I owe you an apology." "Sweetheart, you don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "Tom and I have spent years thinking we were so successful, so important, so busy with our big careers and our big lives. We told ourselves we didn't have time to visit more often, that you understood how demanding our work was. I did understand. But, Dad," Tom interrupted, "we missed the point completely. We thought success meant making money, gaining recognition, climbing ladders. We never realized that you'd achieved something far more significant than anything we've ever done. What do you mean? Karen gestured around the room, where people were still lingering, reluctant to leave. You built a legacy, Dad. Not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in human hearts. You changed the trajectory of hundreds of lives, and through them, you've influenced thousands more. We've been measuring the wrong things, Tom said quietly. We thought your work wasn't important because it wasn't highly paid or prestigious. We never understood that you were doing the most important work of all, shaping the next generation. Frank looked at his children, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. I'm proud of both of you. Your mother would be proud too. You built successful lives. You achieved your goals. But we lost sight of what really matters, Karen said. We lost sight of you. Jennifer, who had been quietly organizing thank you notes and contact information from visitors, approached them. I hope I haven't overstepped by bringing everyone together today. I just felt like Mr. Morrison needed to know how much he'd mattered. You gave us the greatest gift imaginable, Tom said. You showed us who our father really is. And more importantly, Karen added, you reminded us what we want to be. As the last visitor said their goodbyes and the house gradually emptied, Frank found himself alone with his children for the first time in over 3 years. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was comfortable, full of new understanding. Dad, Karen said finally, Tom and I have been talking, and we want to make some changes. What kind of changes? The kind where we remember that the most successful life isn't the one with the most achievements. It's the one with the most love. Tom said, we want to learn from you, Dad. We want to figure out how to make our lives matter the way yours has mattered. Frank looked at his children, really looked at them, and saw past their professional success to the core of who they were. They were good people who had gotten distracted by external measures of worth, just as he had sometimes felt diminished by external measures of importance. The secret, he said quietly, isn't complicated. You just pay attention to the people around you. You notice who needs help, and you help them. You see who feels invisible, and you remind them they matter. You do it not because anyone's watching, but because it's the right thing to do. Is it really that simple? Karen asked. Frank smiled, thinking about little Jenny Walsh sitting in the hallway 32 years ago, about scared Michael Chun hiding in bathroom stalls, about all the children who had just needed someone to see them clearly. It's that simple, he said, and it's that hard. Because most of the time, nobody notices what you're doing. Most of the time, you'll never know if it made a difference. But today you found out it did, Tom said. Today, Frank agreed. I found out that invisible doesn't mean unimportant. As they sat together in the quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of an extraordinary day, empty cake plates, flowers in every vase, a coffee table covered with cards and letters and small gifts, Frank realized that his 80th birthday had become something he'd never expected. It had become the day he learned that a life spent in service to others was never really invisible at all. 6 months later, on a warm May morning, Frank Morrison stood in the lobby of the brand-new Millbrook Community Center, watching as the final touches were put on a bronze plaque near the entrance. The plaque read, "The Frank Morrison Community Center, dedicated to the quiet heroes who change lives one act of kindness at a time." Dad, you're going to be late for your own dedication ceremony, Karen called from across the lobby, where she was directing the setup of folding chairs for the afternoon's event. Frank shook his head in amazement. 6 months ago, he'd been alone in his house, feeling forgotten and invisible. Today, the entire town of Millbrook was gathering to honor him and to open a community center that would continue his legacy of quiet service. The transformation had begun the day after his 80th birthday, when Jennifer Walsh had called a local newspaper about the remarkable story of the janitor who had changed hundreds of lives. The article had gone viral, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by national news outlets. Suddenly, Frank Morrison wasn't just known in Millbrook. He was being celebrated across the country as an example of how ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. But Frank was most proud of what had happened closer to home. "Mr. Morrison," a familiar voice called out. Frank turned to see Danny Rodriguez approaching with a teenage boy who looked like a younger version of himself. Danny, good to see you. Is this Alex? This is my son, Danny said proudly. Alex, this is Mr. Morrison, the man I've told you about. Alex, now 16 and clearly nervous about meeting his father's hero, extended his hand shyly. My dad says you taught him that fixing things is important work. Your father taught himself that, Frank replied, shaking the boy's hand. I just gave him some space to figure it out. Alex has been volunteering here at the center, Danny explained. 3 days a week after school, helping with maintenance and repairs. Turns out he inherited the family gift for fixing things. Frank smiled, seeing the pride in both father and son. And what do you want to be when you grow up, Alex? I want to be like you and my dad, Alex said with surprising confidence. I want to do work that helps people, even if it's not the kind of work that makes you famous. The best work rarely makes you famous, Frank said gently, but always makes you useful. Jennifer appeared beside them, carrying a clipboard and wearing the slightly frazzled expression of someone organizing a major event. Frank, we need you to do a quick sound check in about 10 minutes. The mayor wants to make sure the microphone is working for your speech. I still can't believe they want me to give a speech, Frank muttered. Dad, Tom's voice came from behind him. You're going to do great. Just talk to them the way you talked to us on your birthday. Frank turned to see Tom approaching with a woman in her 30s and 2 young children. I'd like you to meet my family, my wife Sarah and my kids, Emma and Jake. Frank had met Tom's new family briefly at Christmas, but this was the first time he'd spent real time with them. Emma, age 8, looked up at him with curious eyes. Grandpa Frank, are you really the most important person in our whole town? Frank laughed. I don't think I'm important at all, sweetheart. I just try to be helpful. Daddy says you taught him that helping people is the best thing you can do with your life, Emma said matter-of-factly. He says that's why he quit selling houses to rich people and started helping poor people find homes instead. Frank looked at Tom with surprise. You changed your business? Tom nodded, looking slightly embarrassed but proud. I started a nonprofit that helps low-income families navigate the home buying process. It doesn't pay as well as commercial real estate, but it feels like what I should have been doing all along. And I've been volunteering with family literacy programs, Sarah added. Emma and Jake helped me read to younger children at the community center's after-school program. Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. The ripple effects of that one November day continued to spread in ways he'd never anticipated. Mr. Morrison, another voice called out. Frank turned to see Mike Chin approaching with his wife and teenage daughter. Mike, how's retirement treating you? Frank asked. Mike had taken early retirement from the police force to start a youth mentoring program. Better than I expected. Lisa's been helping me with the mentoring program. She's got a gift for working with kids who feel like outsiders. Lisa Chun, now 16 and confident in a way her father had never been at that age, smiled at Frank. Mr. Morrison, I wanted to thank you for something. What's that, sweetheart? For teaching my dad that being different isn't something to hide from. He raised me to be proud of who I am, and he told me that lesson came from you. Frank shook his head. Your father learned that lesson himself. You just showed him it was possible, Lisa interrupted gently. Sometimes that's all someone needs. As more people gathered for the dedication ceremony, Frank was amazed by how many familiar faces he saw. Not just the people who had visited him on his birthday, but their families, their children, even some of their grandchildren. 3 generations of people connected by acts of kindness that had started decades ago. Mrs. Patterson, now 85 and still using her walker, made her way over to him. Frank Morrison, are you ready for your moment in the spotlight? Honestly, Mrs. Patterson, I'd rather be cleaning something. She laughed. I know you would. But sometimes the world needs to see what quiet heroism looks like. Sometimes people need to be reminded that the most important work happens when nobody's watching. The ceremony began at 2 p.m., with the mayor introducing Frank as a man who spent 42 years proving that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. When Frank stepped up to the microphone, looking out a crowd of several hundred people, He felt the same nervousness he'd experienced on his 80th birthday when Jennifer had first knocked on his door. "I'm not much of a speech giver," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "so I'll try to keep this simple." He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Children he'd helped who were now adults, parents who were teaching their own children the lessons they'd learned from him, community members who had been inspired by his story to look for ways to serve others. 6 months ago, I thought I was invisible. I thought that spending my life as a janitor meant I hadn't really mattered to anyone. I was wrong about that, but not in the way you might think. The crowd was completely silent, hanging on his words. I wasn't wrong, because people noticed me more than I realized. I was wrong, because I was measuring the wrong things. I was thinking about whether people saw me, instead of thinking about whether I was seeing them. Frank's voice grew stronger as he continued. Every child who walked through the halls of Millbrook Elementary was important. Every student who was struggling, every kid who felt different or scared or angry, they all mattered. My job wasn't to be seen by them. My job was to see them. He gestured toward the crowd, where he could see Jennifer wiping tears from her eyes. A wise woman recently taught me that kindness is like a stone thrown into a pond. You might not see all the ripples, but that doesn't mean they're not spreading out, touching shores you never imagined. Frank paused, thinking about all the stories he'd heard over the past 6 months, all the lives that had been touched by simple acts of caring. This community center isn't really about honoring me. It's about honoring the idea that every person in this town, every child, every family, every neighbor, matters. It's about creating a place where people can come when they need help, where children can feel safe and seen, where we can all practice the kind of quiet service that makes communities strong. He looked directly at his children, at the families of all the people he'd helped over the years, at the young faces in the crowd who represented the future. I want to challenge everyone here to look for the invisible people in your lives. The children who seem angry but are really scared. The neighbors who seem fine but are really struggling. The co-workers who seem confident but are really insecure. See them. Help them. Not because anyone's watching, but because it's what people do for each other. Frank stepped back on the microphone to thunderous applause, but what moved him most wasn't the noise. It was the sight of people turning to each other, making eye contact, shaking hands, beginning conversations that might not have happened otherwise. After the ceremony, as Frank mingled with the crowd and toured the community center's facilities, a tutoring center, a food pantry, a space for support groups, a workshop area where people could learn practical skills, he was approached by a young woman he didn't recognize. "Mr. Morrison? My name is Ashley Rodriguez. I'm Danny's niece, and I'm starting my first year of college in the fall." "Congratulations, Ashley. What are you planning to study?" "Education. I want to be an elementary school counselor." She smiled nervously. "I've heard so many stories about you from my family, and I wanted to ask you something." "What's that?" "What advice would you give to someone who wants to make a difference in children's lives?" Frank thought for a moment, looking around at the community center bustling with activity, at children playing in the safe space that had been created in his honor, at adults volunteering their time to help others. "Pay attention," he said finally. "Really pay attention. Children will tell you what they need if you know how to listen. Sometimes they tell you with words, but more often they tell you with behavior, with body language, with the way they respond when you treat them with kindness." "And then what?" "Then you do the next right thing. Usually it's something small. Usually it's something that feels inadequate. But small things done with love become big things over time." Ashley nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I want to be the kind of person who sees children the way you saw them." "You already are," Frank said gently. "You wouldn't be asking the question if you weren't." As the day wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Frank found himself standing in the center's main room with his children, Jennifer, and a few of the people who had become closest to him over the past months. "Dad," Karen said, "I have something to tell you." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I've been thinking about our conversation on your birthday, about how success should be measured. I've decided to make some changes to my company." "What kind of changes?" We're launching a program to provide free technology training to underserved communities, starting right here in Millbrook, but expanding from there. I want to use the resources I've built to create opportunities for people who might not otherwise have them. Frank smiled, seeing his daughter's excitement about this new direction. And Tom's not the only one who's changed careers, Jennifer added with a grin. Sarah Martinez left her position at Cleveland Children's Hospital to become the director of this community center. Sarah's going to run this place? Starting next month, Sarah said, approaching their group. I realized that I wanted to work closer to home, in a place where I could implement all the lessons I learned from you about seeing people clearly and responding to what they actually need. Frank looked around the room, overwhelmed by the interconnected web of positive change that had somehow grown from one woman's decision to bring him a birthday cake and tell him the truth about his impact. There's one more thing, Jennifer said quietly. Frank, I wanted you to know that I've been documenting all of this, the stories, the connections, the ripple effects. I'm writing a book about what happens when ordinary people choose to serve others in extraordinary ways. A book, not just about you, but about all of us, about what it means to build a life of service, about how kindness multiplies across generations, about the way communities change when people decide to see each other clearly. Frank shook his head in amazement. Jenny Walsh, you continue to surprise me. Actually, she said with a smile, there's one more surprise. She handed him a sealed envelope. This came for you yesterday, from the President of the United States. Frank stared at the official seal, hardly believing what he was seeing. The President? You're being invited to the White House to receive the Presidential Citizens Medal for your lifetime of service to children and communities. Frank opened the letter with trembling hands, reading the formal language that described him as an exemplary citizen whose quiet dedication to helping others represents the finest values of American service. I can't accept this, he said quietly. Why not? Tom asked. Because I didn't do any of this for recognition. I did it because... He paused, searching for the right words. Because it needed doing, which, Jennifer said gently, is exactly why you deserve the recognition. As Frank stood surrounded by family and friends in the community center that bore his name, he realized that the greatest gift of his 80th birthday hadn't been learning about his impact on others. It had been discovering that service creates its own kind of family, connecting hearts across generations and circumstances in ways that biological relationships sometimes can't. He thought about the scared little girl who had sat in a school hallway 32 years ago, who had grown up to become a woman dedicated to helping other scared children. He thought about all the ripples that had spread from that simple moment of seeing and responding to someone who needed help. You know what the most amazing thing is? He said to the group around him. What's that, Dad? Karen asked. 6 months ago, I thought my story was ending. Turns out it was just beginning. Frank Morrison had spent his life believing that the most important work was done quietly, invisibly, without recognition or reward. He'd been right about that. But on his 80th birthday, he'd learned that invisible doesn't mean unimportant, and that quiet service often speaks the loudest of all. The best stories he'd discovered aren't about heroes who save the world in dramatic fashion. They're about ordinary people who choose, day after day, to see the people around them clearly and respond with kindness. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to see how far those ripples spread.